Josh discovers that his wife is pregnant, but his joy turns to shock. The child might not be his. 6 months of secrets, strange behavior, and doubts now come down to one question. Who is the real father? Melanie tries to explain, but her excuses only add to the tension. Can Josh forgive her betrayal if the child truly isn't his? Their relationship hangs by a thread, and the final decision will change their lives forever. Her bachelorette party ended in the arms of another man, a pregnancy that changed everything. Josh sat in the cozy living room of their house, listening to the rustling autumn wind outside the window. Melanie was in the bedroom, getting ready to meet her friends. She always treated such outings with great seriousness, carefully choosing a dress, selecting accessories, and spending a long time applying makeup. "Are you sure you don't want me to drive you?" Josh asked, leaning against the door and watching her finish applying mascara. Without taking her eyes off the mirror, Melanie replied, "No, don't worry. Kate will pick me up. She texted me that she's already on her way." Josh nodded and tried to smile, though a strange unease stirred in his heart. Lately, he had noticed that Melanie had been staying out longer after such meetings. She always found explanations, but something in her tone or behavior left him unsettled. "Where are you going tonight?" He tried to start a conversation. With a light movement, Melanie adjusted her hair and gave him a quick glance. "To a new restaurant downtown. Julia said it has a great atmosphere and a fantastic menu." "Sounds good," Josh muttered. He went down to the kitchen and started washing dishes, but his thoughts kept returning to Melanie. They used to spend a lot of time together, cooking dinners, playing board games, or just watching movies. Their life seemed perfect. But with each passing day, Josh increasingly felt something slipping out of his control. The loud sound of heels on the stairs brought him back to reality. Melanie looked stunning in a dark green dress that accentuated her figure. She smiled and leaned in to kiss him on the cheek. "Don't wait up for me. Go to bed. I might be late." "All right, take care," he replied, though deep down, he knew he wouldn't be able to sleep. The door closed, and silence settled over the house. Josh turned on the TV, trying to get absorbed in a series, but his thoughts were elsewhere. He checked his phone to see if Melanie had messaged him, but the screen remained blank. Around 11 o'clock, Josh decided to text her. "How are you? Everything okay?" The message went unread. Time dragged on unbearably, and the unease in his soul grew stronger. Suddenly, he heard a car engine outside. He looked out and saw a vehicle pull up, not Kate's car, but an unfamiliar black Porsche. Melanie quickly got out and, as if explaining something to the driver, leaned toward the open window. Her laughter echoed loudly in the night's silence. Josh held his breath. She didn't look like someone who had just spent an evening with friends. Her movements were too graceful, her gaze too light and carefree. The car drove off, and Melanie entered the house, humming something to herself. "How was the meeting?" he asked as she entered the living room. "Wonderful," she replied without even looking at him. "We had a great time, laughed a lot, and reminisced about old stories." Josh watched her, trying to figure out if she was telling the truth. But Melanie was a master of persuasion. "You really do look happy," he said, trying to hide the sarcasm in his voice. She just smiled and went to the bedroom. That night, Josh barely slept. His mind worked non-stop, trying to piece together the puzzle. Who was in that black sedan? Why did Melanie seem so cheerful if she spent the evening with her friends? The next morning, she acted as if nothing had happened. Josh noticed her receive another message on her phone and quickly delete it. He decided not to say anything, but the sense of anxiety only grew stronger. Something was wrong, and Josh decided to find out what it was. Josh sat on the couch, recalling how Melanie described her friends. All of them, according to her, were married women who met solely for the sake of chatting and exchanging gossip. But now, Josh began to doubt that idyllic picture. The next time Melanie announced she was meeting her friends, Josh decided to use the moment to learn more. "I thought, maybe I could come along to the next meeting? It might be interesting to meet your friends," he suggested, trying to keep his voice calm. Melanie paused for a moment as if considering. Then, with a smile, she shook her head. "Oh no, Josh. These are just ladies' gatherings. You'd feel out of place there." She dismissed the idea so easily that it struck Josh as suspicious, but he didn't argue. Instead, when the day of the meeting arrived, he decided to act preemptively. As soon as Melanie left the house, Josh watched her from the window and then followed her. He got into his old car, keeping a safe distance. He felt strange, like he was betraying her trust, but the thought that she might be hiding something wouldn't let him rest. After a few blocks, Melanie stopped near a cozy cafe in the city center. She went inside, and Josh, after parking, decided to wait. Time passed slowly, and it seemed she really was meeting her friends. But about an hour later, Melanie left the cafe, and she wasn't alone. Beside her was a man Josh had never seen before. Tall, athletic, he smiled and held her by the elbow. Josh felt something cold and heavy drop into his chest. He held his breath, unable to believe his eyes. They talked and laughed like they had known each other for a long time. The man opened the car door, and Melanie got in. They drove off, and Josh, feeling his pulse pounding in his temples, followed them. They stopped at another restaurant, this one much more luxurious. Josh parked nearby, careful not to be noticed. He got out of his car and entered the restaurant, choosing a table in a cozy corner where he could see them both. Melanie looked happy. She laughed often, leaned toward her companion, holding a glass of wine. Josh found it hard to breathe. His mind was in turmoil. Could this be just a business meeting? But if so, why hadn't she told him anything? Suddenly, he overheard the man leaning closer to Melanie and saying, "So, when are you finally going to tell him?" "Quiet," she replied with a light laugh, but her eyes were serious. "It's not as simple as you think." Josh barely restrained himself from approaching them and causing a scene. He waited until they left and returned to his car. His heart was pounding so hard it felt like it might burst from his chest. He decided not to return home immediately. Instead, he stayed in the car, trying to figure out what to do next. His mind painted the worst scenarios, but part of him still clung to the hope that it was some kind of misunderstanding. When Melanie came home late that night, Josh was already waiting for her. He pretended to be reading a book, but his eyes betrayed his real emotions. "How was your evening?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "Wonderful," she replied with the same smile as always. "We talked, laughed. It was a lot of fun." Josh nodded but said nothing this time. He knew he needed to gather more information before confronting her with the truth. In the following days, Josh noticed small but alarming changes in Melanie's behavior. She became more cautious, checked her phone more often, and avoided long conversations with him. Sometimes she even seemed anxious when she heard him enter the room. One day, Josh accidentally saw Melanie nervously typing a message while sitting in the kitchen. Hearing his footsteps, she immediately turned off her phone screen. "What are you writing?" he asked with a slight smile, though he felt tension building inside. "Oh, it's just Sarah. She's planning another girls' night out," Melanie replied without looking at him. Josh didn't press the matter, but now he was certain. She was hiding something. His suspicions grew stronger with each passing day. He began carefully analyzing her words and actions, trying to find a clue. One evening, while Melanie was in the shower, her phone, left on the living room table, rang. Josh thought it might be his chance. He quickly approached and saw the name on the screen, Clint. "Who's Clint?" he wondered, running through possibilities in his mind. The sound of water in the bathroom suddenly seemed very loud, and Josh felt his heart racing. He didn't dare answer the call but stored the moment in his memory. That same evening, he decided to talk to her, but not directly. He chose a different approach. "It seems like you've been a bit distant lately," he said over dinner, glancing into her eyes. "Is everything all right?" Melanie paused for a moment, but quickly smiled. "Everything's fine, Josh. Just a lot of work, and the girls are constantly planning things." Josh nodded, trying not to reveal his unease. But when Melanie went to bed, he stayed in the living room. His thoughts were focused on one thing. Who was Clint? He decided he couldn't wait any longer and needed to act more carefully. The next day, when Melanie said she was going out to meet her friends, Josh decided to be smarter. Pretending to be working, he stayed home but installed a tracking app on her phone. His conscience tormented him, but his desire to uncover the truth won out. When Melanie left the house, Josh opened the app. At first, Her location matched the cafe she often visited with her friends. But after half an hour, the signal changed. Now she was in a completely different part of the city. He noted the address, and his heart skipped a beat. It was a fitness club. Josh quickly got into his car and headed there. He parked in the lot and entered the fitness club, trying not to draw attention. There, in the gym, he saw Melanie. She was laughing and talking with the man he recognized, the same man from the restaurant, Clint. Josh didn't approach them. He decided to observe, trying to understand what was going on. But suddenly, he overheard a snippet of their conversation. "I can't believe you haven't told him yet," Clint said, leaning closer to Melanie. "I'll tell him, just give me some time," she replied quietly. It felt like Josh had been doused with cold water. His suspicions were being confirmed. But what exactly was she planning to tell him? His hands clenched into fists, but he forced himself to step back from the situation. Back home, Josh sat in the living room, staring out the window. He couldn't figure out how long Melanie had been playing this game. What else was she hiding? But he decided it wasn't the time for confrontation yet. He adjusted to her game once again, determined to uncover the full truth. Later that night, when Melanie came home, she looked calm and content. "How was the meeting?" he asked, feigning indifference. "Good as always. Sarah brought a new friend, and it was fun," she replied without even glancing at him. Josh knew he could no longer trust her words, but he wasn't ready to give up yet. He realized he needed undeniable proof that would leave no room for excuses. Josh was already 50 years old, and though he had a solid build and brown eyes that had once attracted many women, time had taken its toll. His dark brown hair was starting to gray, and a slight bald spot had become noticeable. Josh loved a peaceful life, reading, walks in the park, and fishing. His wife, Melanie, was nearly 22 years younger. Her large green eyes, blonde hair, and delicate facial features gave her an air of innocence. She worked as a marketer at a small company but spent most of her time on herself, exercising, skincare, and meeting friends. When they married, Josh was convinced the age gap wouldn't be an issue for them. He saw in Melanie a youthfulness that could breathe energy into his life. She, in turn, found in Josh the stability she had been searching for after a series of failed relationships with men her age. After several days of distance, Melanie suddenly changed her behavior. She came home with a bouquet of his favorite flowers, lilies, and suggested they spend a romantic evening together. Josh was surprised but didn't show it. "You deserve some rest," she said, wrapping her arms around his shoulders as he sat on the couch. "I know I've been a bit busy lately, but I want to make it up to you." "Sounds great," he replied, trying to hide his doubt. "What do you have in mind?" "You'll see," Melanie smiled and kissed him on the cheek. That evening, she set the table with candles, prepared a dish he loved, grilled trout with lemon sauce, and even played jazz music, which he usually turned on himself. Josh began to doubt his suspicions. Maybe he was being overly suspicious? Perhaps her strange behavior was just stress or fatigue. "That was incredible," he said after dinner, looking at her with a warm smile. "I think I might have overdone it with analyzing you." "Analyzing?" Melanie raised her eyebrows in surprise. "Well, you know me. I'm always looking for reasons, even where there aren't any." She chuckled softly and took his hand. "You're not looking for anything. You're just my best husband. You know, I appreciate you more than you think." Melanie's words sounded sincere, but Josh noticed how her hand slightly trembled as she held his. It was a small detail, but it left a deep impression on his subconscious. The next morning, when Melanie said she had to go to a meeting with colleagues, Josh decided to test an idea. He went into the room where she had left her phone and picked it up, pretending it was accidental. "You forgot your phone," he said, handing it to her. "Oh, thank you," she said quickly, taking it back, but she couldn't hide how nervously she held it. This scene only strengthened his resolve to act further. While she was at her meeting, he decided to check her laptop. Josh wasn't a fan of spying, but he felt he needed answers. There was nothing suspicious in her email. However, when he opened the documents folder, he found a file titled Clint. Opening it, he saw a series of travel photos with Melanie and another man. His heart froze. It didn't look like just friendship. Their hugs, their smiles. It was all too intimate. And while these could have been old photos, he knew Clint was still in her life. Yet Josh still didn't want to jump to conclusions. He closed the file and decided he needed more evidence to leave no room for excuses. That night, Melanie came home later than usual. She looked a bit tired but tried to act as she always did. "How was the meeting?" Josh asked, trying to keep his tone steady. "Very productive. We discussed a lot of new ideas for the campaign." "It seems like you've been working hard lately. You probably need some rest." "Yes, you're right," she replied, smiling again. But in her eyes, Josh saw unease. He decided not to ask further questions. His plan was simple: keep observing without giving her any reason to suspect he knew anything. A few days later, Melanie suggested they spend the weekend at a spa. She argued that they both deserved to relax. Josh agreed, but once again, he felt she was trying to distract him from something. When they were at the hotel, Melanie suddenly received a call and stepped into the hallway to answer it. Josh decided to follow her. "I can't talk now," he heard her whisper from around the corner. "Yes, everything's going according to plan." "No, he doesn't suspect a thing. I'll tell you later." Josh's blood ran cold. He returned to the room, trying to look nonchalant. This time, he was more surprised than ever. He couldn't shake the feeling that the betrayal was no longer just a suspicion. Josh returned to the spa hotel room, trying to maintain his composure. Melanie's words from the phone call echoed in his head, and he couldn't shake them. "Everything's going according to plan." This phrase troubled him the most. He still didn't understand what this plan was, but it was clear that Melanie was becoming more distant and secretive. When Melanie came back into the room, she immediately went to the window, trying to hide any emotional reaction from him. Her movements were quick, and Josh noticed how nervously she behaved, as if she was out of place. "Are you okay?" he asked, trying to keep his voice natural. "Yes, everything's fine," she replied without turning to him. "I'm just a little tired. Maybe I should go for a walk or get a massage." Josh could feel the shift in their atmosphere. She was avoiding him, her eyes wouldn't meet his, and it was very unusual for them. He had never seen her like this, as if she was hiding something, focused on something important that he wasn't meant to know about. He couldn't help but wonder, who was the man she spoke to on the phone, and why did he say everything was going according to plan? It seemed as though Melanie was orchestrating some complex maneuver, and Josh wasn't part of the plan. He tried to refrain from questioning her. He knew he needed more evidence to understand if this was just his suspicion or a real betrayal, but his heart couldn't rest. "I'm going for a walk," Josh decided, wanting to give Melanie some space. She nodded and said nothing. During his walk, he thought more and more about the situation. At first, it seemed like this was just normal suspicion, normal distrust that sometimes arises in any relationship. But now it had grown into something bigger. The more Josh thought about it, the more convinced he was that behind all these actions was not just an innocent meeting, but something serious. That plan Melanie had mentioned so cautiously was a mystery to him, but he felt that the more he uncovered, the more riddles would surface. Josh stepped out of the hotel and into a nearby cafe, trying to find some solace in a cup of coffee. His thoughts kept circling around Melanie. He couldn't understand what was happening or why she had changed. Just a few weeks ago, their relationship seemed perfect. He and Melanie had spent quality time together, laughed, and planned for the future. But now everything was different. It became clear to him that there was a growing distance between them. When he returned to the hotel, Melanie was already asleep. She looked tired again, and her position on the bed was unusually closed, as if she was trying to avoid his gaze. "I've prepared dinner," Josh said, trying to remain calm. Melanie looked up at him for only a moment before turning away again. "Thank you, but I'm not hungry. I'm going to sleep," she said, her voice emotionless, which worried Josh even more. He couldn't stay silent anymore. He returned to the bed and sat down beside her. "Melanie, is there something I should know?" he asked, watching her reaction. She sighed and turned to face him. Her eyes were full of sadness. "Josh, I don't want to hurt you, but there are some things I can't tell you. It's not about you. It's more about me." She tried to find the right words. Josh frowned. His heart was in pain, but he didn't let it completely take over. "Melanie, you mean a lot to me." And I can't understand why you're distancing yourself from me. Josh heard Melanie sigh softly, her gaze turning sorrowful. She stayed silent for a few seconds as he waited for her response. Her words hadn't fully revealed the truth yet, but he felt that this conversation had to settle everything. Josh, I don't know how to explain, she began, her voice sounding lost. I don't want to lose you, but lately it's been hard for me. Everything has become unpredictable. I started planning more girls' nights out. I know it might seem strange, but I need it. And for that, I need money. You see? I'm trying to create something big, but it's draining all my energy. Josh felt his heart tighten at her words, but he tried to keep a calm expression. Something in her explanations felt unclear, but he couldn't quite piece it together yet. You need money for your projects? He asked, trying not to reveal his unease. How much do you need? Melanie looked at him again, her eyes somewhat sorrowful, though she didn't avert her gaze. About $10,000. It would help me realize my plans. I know it's a lot, but I'm confident this is the right path for me. Josh mulled it over, his thoughts darting in different directions. 10,000 wasn't a small amount, but he couldn't leave his wife in such a situation, especially seeing how much she was struggling. His desire to give her the chance to pursue what she loved took over again. It's not a problem, he said, trying to sound calm. If it'll make you happy, I'll give you the money. Just promise me that we'll find time for us again. I want us to get through this together, Melanie. She smiled, but it was a tense smile, and she quickly averted her gaze again. It wasn't the same joy she had shown in the past when he did something nice for her. But Josh couldn't understand what exactly was bothering her. I promise, Josh, she said softly. We'll find time, I promise. But you know I've wanted a baby for a long time. Josh wasn't entirely convinced, but he had no solid proof that something was wrong. He thought his suspicions might just be feeding his doubts and that he needed to trust his wife more. But there was one question he couldn't let go of. Melanie, do you still want a baby? He asked, sensing that this moment was crucial. She looked at him in surprise, as if the question caught her off guard. But not for long. Yes, I've been thinking about it, she said, gently touching her stomach. I want us to have a family. Don't you? Josh was stunned by this statement. He thought it was too soon, that they weren't ready for this. But Melanie's gaze was serious, and he saw both a hint of sadness and nervous excitement in her eyes. No, I think it's a wonderful idea, he replied after a pause. If you want this, I want to be a father too. The moment seemed significant, and Josh tried to understand what was driving her to say this. She wasn't just upset. She looked nervous, and his suspicions grew even stronger. Why was Melanie suddenly talking about having a child when her behavior had been changing so visibly? Why hadn't she brought it up before? Their conversation was supposed to be a moment of unity, but Josh couldn't shake the feeling that there was still so much he didn't understand. Melanie seemed as if she was trying to convince herself more than him. He looked at her again, trying to see more than just promises and plans. And he felt that the betrayal he had begun to suspect might be far more complicated than he had imagined. But until he had the whole truth, he couldn't draw any conclusions. And the more he observed, the more he felt that his wife was hiding something important. The betrayal wasn't the only mystery. It seemed like their lives were changing with every new step. The next day, Josh sat in the living room, watching Melanie as she prepared dinner. He was attentive to her every movement, but tried not to reveal his doubts. She was too perfect not to be cautious. His intuition told him that something was happening, but he couldn't yet figure out what. In recent days, Melanie had been acting strangely. During the day, she was close and caring, even trying to conceive a child as she had promised. They spent time together, often walking, dining, and trying to rebuild the connection that had once been so natural. However, in the evenings, when it was time for her girls' nights out, she became a different person. Josh noticed her fleeting glances as she quickly left, and when she returned late, she didn't talk about those evenings with any detail, only offering general phrases about friends and good times. He decided to act carefully. The thought crossed his mind. What if I start asking questions, watching her reactions, and slowly sensing whether there's something suspicious in her behavior? He decided to test a psychological maneuver, becoming natural in his questions so as not to arouse suspicion. Melanie, do you really have a good time at your parties? Josh asked as soon as she returned from another event. Melanie averted her gaze and smiled, but Josh noticed how her eyes seemed less lively. It was the first small clue. Yes, everything was great. It could have been more relaxing, but at events like these, there's always so much to do, she said, though her voice sounded a bit flat. Josh nodded without revealing anything, but the feeling lingered. He decided to try a different approach to understand how she would react to more specific situations. The next evening, he suggested spending time at home, asking if she wanted a break from her constant parties. Listen, how about we spend a quiet evening together? I was thinking we could just watch a movie, drink some wine, and talk a bit, he said without waiting for her response. Melanie initially looked surprised but then smiled. That sounds nice, but I already have plans for the evening, she replied, quickly diverting her attention to her phone. I promised to meet the girls. Maybe next time? Josh watched her, noting her nervous behavior as she hurried to get ready. She didn't seem as enthusiastic about his proposal as she once might have been. Well, all right, he said, trying not to show his disappointment. I thought we could relax together, but if that's the case, no problem. Melanie didn't respond, leaving the house, and Josh stayed in the room alone. He felt more and more uneasy. She was so distant, and he couldn't understand why. A few days later, Josh decided to take more initiative. He thought it was time to gradually prepare Melanie for an unpleasant surprise. He didn't want to act aggressively, so he began asking questions that might provoke a reaction. How long have you been planning these parties? He asked, sitting at the table and carefully observing her reaction. Melanie looked surprised, as always, when Josh asked questions about her activities. Well, for a while now. It's very important to me, Josh. You know, I need to maintain my popularity among friends and clients, she said, averting her gaze and playing with her phone. Josh sat quietly, analyzing everything. Melanie truly spent a lot of time at these parties, but what was she really doing? What had caused her to change so much? This time, Josh didn't back down. He decided to make another move, changing the dynamic of the situation. He devised a strategy. The real test of her reaction would come when she wasn't prepared. I want to try something at these parties too. Maybe I could join you sometime? Josh said with a smile. We could meet your friends together. It would be fun. Melanie tried to hide her anxiety, but her eyes betrayed a nervous reaction. You wouldn't enjoy it. It's chaos. I know you prefer peace. It's better if you stay home, she replied too quickly, as if trying to avoid the situation. Josh felt again that something was wrong, but now he had a clearer goal. He no longer simply suspected that she was hiding something serious. He began to suspect that everything happening in her life wasn't what it seemed. Continuing his maneuver, Josh decided to keep observing. He didn't say anything to her, but over the next few days, he started paying closer attention to her movements. Later, he even discovered that her parties had become more frequent and intense. One night, when she returned late again, Josh, though trying to remain calm, decided to ask another question. Melanie, I'm starting to worry. Something tells me you're not telling me the whole truth. She stopped, her face serious, but with a smile, she replied, this is all important to me. Don't worry. You're my husband, and I've never betrayed you. But Josh no longer believed her words. The next day, Josh sat on the couch, glancing at Melanie as she finished getting ready for another party. He noticed how her behavior changed, especially when it came to the girls' nights out. At first, she seemed awkward, then began coming up with various excuses why he couldn't join her. Why don't you want me to go with you? Josh asked, trying to remain calm, though inside, his anxiety was growing. Melanie, always skilled at managing situations, began explaining that the party would be girls only and that there would be a lot of noise and chaos, which wouldn't suit him. Josh listened to her, but his suspicions didn't fade. He decided to ask a more direct question. Are there men at these parties? Melanie couldn't avoid the question. She hesitated for a moment and then said, Well, yes, sometimes there are men, but it's not a big deal, it's just for fun. I want to go, Josh replied, not taking his eyes off her. His intuition told him something was wrong. Melanie sighed, and after a short pause, she agreed, All right, come along. But it's going to be noisy, with lots of people, and you don't like that kind of atmosphere. Josh said firmly, I still want to go, and I'll go with you. They spent the whole day together, trying to fulfill her dream of having a baby. Josh noticed how she became somewhat distant afterward, focusing solely on her appearance as she began getting ready for the party. Melanie put on a short skirt that accentuated her figure, black tights, an elegant jacket, and blazer, and she did her hair and makeup impeccably. Josh, though trying to stay calm, couldn't help but notice how her appearance made his heart race faster. From all his intuitive feelings, he couldn't pinpoint what troubled him the most, but the presence of men at the party heightened his anxiety. Are you really sure everything will be fine? He asked, glancing at her during the drive. Melanie just nodded, trying to reassure him. Yes, Josh, don't worry. I promise everything will be okay. But he wasn't convinced. As soon as they arrived at the venue, the atmosphere made him feel out of place. The large house, the lights flickering through the windows, and the laughter of women coming from inside created a sense that things weren't as he had imagined. Are you ready? Melanie asked as they approached the door. Josh didn't respond immediately. He felt everything inside him tighten. Yes, he said, taking a step forward. But his face was a mixture of anxiety and uncertainty. He couldn't explain why, but something was unsettling him deeply. Josh and Melanie entered the large house where the party was taking place. Melanie immediately headed off somewhere, telling Josh they'd see each other later because she needed to greet everyone, and then she disappeared. Around him, people were dancing, chatting, and the music was loud. Josh started observing everything, looking at the details. Suddenly, he saw someone familiar. It was his friend Fred. Josh heard the music grow even louder as he stood there with Fred. The party's atmosphere felt entirely foreign to him. He had never liked large gatherings filled with noise and chaos. All the people dancing, laughing, and chatting felt alien to him, as though he had stepped into another world. Fred approached him and started asking Josh what he was doing there. It's not easy to get into this party, Fred remarked. Josh began explaining that his wife, Melanie, was the organizer. You know, Josh, I have to say, she's really impressive, Fred said, looking oddly satisfied as they stood at the edge of the room. Such a woman. Not only beautiful but also smart. Everyone here respects her. Josh nodded, but his eyes betrayed a mix of curiosity and unease. Yes, I think so too, he replied, trying not to show his internal turmoil. His mind was already spinning through all the possibilities. Listen, Fred lowered his voice, as if he wanted to share a secret. Melanie spends a lot of time here with Clint. You know, that guy who owns the fitness centers in town. They seem pretty close. Josh felt a chill run down his spine. With Clint? His voice was slightly hoarse. I know they know each other, but you're not saying that? Oh no, Fred quickly denied. I don't know for sure, but when they're together, it looks like more than just friendship. Maybe it's just rumors, but who knows? Josh took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. His heart started beating faster. He wasn't sure if this was just an innocent assumption or something more, but he needed to find out the truth. You realize it's just rumors, right? He asked, trying to steer the conversation back to safer ground. Yeah, maybe it's nothing serious, Fred replied, smiling, but Josh noticed the uncertainty in his eyes. I'm just saying I've seen them together a few times. If you want, you can find out for yourself. Clint might even be here tonight, but I'm not sure. Josh didn't respond immediately, looking at Fred. He was confused, his thoughts racing. Melanie and Clint? Could it really be? Or was it just speculation? But why had Fred brought it up? It was becoming increasingly unsettling. Thanks, Fred, Josh said, not entirely sure what else to say. I'll think about it. Fred nodded and stepped away, returning to his spot among the guests, leaving Josh alone with his thoughts. Josh stood there for a while longer, watching as people came and went, but he couldn't shake off what Fred had said. Questions swirled in his mind. What did this mean for his relationship with Melanie? What was really going on? Meanwhile, Melanie was already far away. She had disappeared into the crowd, mingling with other people as she had promised, leaving Josh alone with his thoughts. He decided he needed to find out more, and while she was occupied, he would try to find Clint. Walking through the hall, Josh involuntarily began observing the people. His gaze lingered on several men sitting at a table, chatting and laughing. However, Clint wasn't among them. Melanie had mentioned him several times before, but now Josh couldn't find the man in question. Josh couldn't find Clint and started searching for Melanie. He looked for her for a long time, even going upstairs, but he couldn't find her anywhere. He returned to the first floor and began asking the women, "Have you seen my wife, Melanie?" They seemed surprised and asked, "She has a husband?" Wow, that's surprising. Josh was shocked that they didn't know, but he didn't want to create a scene. The women said they saw her go to the restroom. Josh went to the restrooms, but all the doors were locked. He tried pulling on the handles, but nothing happened. Josh returned to the bar and stood there, observing. Suddenly, a man emerged from the restroom. It was Clint. Josh stood silently, his heart beating faster. At first, he couldn't believe what he was seeing, but it all seemed too obvious. Clint walked out of the restroom, and just a few seconds later, Melanie appeared. Her face was calm, but Josh noticed how she quickly glanced around, as if trying to make sure no one saw her. They walked down the hallway, and Josh, without taking his eyes off them, followed a few steps behind. He tried to remain unnoticed, but his heart pounded with anxiety. Everything in his body screamed that something was wrong, that something significant was about to happen. Melanie paused for a few seconds, looking back. Josh hid around a corner, not wanting to be seen. Clint smirked and began saying something to her, but Josh couldn't hear their words. He carefully observed their movements, trying to understand what was happening. "Are you here?" Fred's voice suddenly came from around the corner, startling Josh. "Yes," Josh replied, trying to hide his emotions. "What is this place? I can't find Melanie." Fred looked at Josh with curiosity. "She's with Clint again, isn't she?" "I don't know. Maybe I'm mistaken, but they're often together." Josh felt his nerves unraveling inside him. He felt helpless and didn't know what to do. Fred glanced at him and quietly added, "You know, I've heard a lot of rumors about them, but it's better not to make a scene at these kinds of parties. You know how things can be here." Josh nodded, but there was no peace in his heart. He knew this wasn't just rumors. His intuition told him that Melanie and Clint had some sort of relationship and that it was escalating. But what should he do now? He saw them in the restroom. This was direct evidence of betrayal. He returned to the hallway, watching as Melanie and Clint talked. They seemed so in sync, so close, that Josh couldn't suppress the wave of jealousy that swept over him. He felt that all he could do was find out the truth, and fast. With this resolve, he decided not to wait or delay any longer. Josh quietly approached one of the doors, observing Melanie and Clint still in the hallway. He took a deep breath and started moving toward them. But before he could get close, he stopped when he overheard part of their conversation. "We can't keep doing this, Clint," Melanie said, her voice shaky and nervous. "Why? I thought everything was going well." Clint sounded confident, even slightly sarcastic. Melanie sighed. "I can't keep living a lie, Clint. I don't want to hurt Josh, but this is getting too hard. I can't escape what's between us." Josh stood, holding his breath, feeling as if these words were tearing him apart inside. They were together, not just friends or colleagues. They had a relationship, and it was happening right in front of him. He didn't know how long he stood there listening to them, but when he finally decided to approach, the door to the room suddenly opened, and Melanie stepped out right in front of him. Her face was calm, but Josh could see how she froze upon seeing him. There was something in her expression he couldn't put into words: sadness, anxiety, and fear. "Josh, you're here," she asked, trying to smile, but her smile was faint. "What are you doing, Melanie?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm. "What is all this? I saw you with Clint. You're not just friends with him, are you?" Melanie stayed silent for a few seconds, her eyes widening as she realized that Josh knew the truth. "Josh, she began, but she couldn't find the words. Her face looked as though she was trying to come up with an explanation, but all her words seemed meaningless. "You've been together, haven't you?" Josh interrupted, his voice no longer calm. "This is more than just business meetings. I know there's something between you two." Melanie lowered her head, unable to look him in the eyes. She realized she couldn't lie anymore. "Yes, Josh," she said quietly. It's true. There's more between us than you think. But I never wanted this. Josh felt his heart clench. He stood silently, watching her, unsure of what to do with all of this. How long have you been betraying me? He asked, and his voice was so calm it frightened Melanie even more. 6 months already. This wasn't supposed to happen, Josh, but with you, I didn't feel what I truly wanted, she admitted, her voice trembling. Josh heard her words but couldn't believe them. Everything he knew and loved was literally falling apart in front of him. You've been with him all this time, and now you're telling me you didn't want this? It doesn't make sense, Melanie, he whispered, his voice filled with despair. He couldn't hold it in any longer. Josh drove home. The next morning, Josh woke up with a heavy feeling in his chest. Melanie wasn't home. He realized that everything that had happened yesterday wasn't just a drunken outburst or an unfortunate coincidence. He knew she had betrayed him. All those months of lies, all those secrets. He couldn't find peace. Gathering his strength, Josh called her. He waited for a long time before she finally picked up. Melanie? He asked, trying to hide the anxiety in his voice. Yes, Josh, she replied, her voice calm, as if nothing had happened. Where are you? You didn't come home. I'm worried. What happened? Melanie was silent for a few seconds before responding. I'm at the hospital, but everything's fine. Don't worry. Please come see me. I want to see you. Josh felt his heart clench, but at the same time, he was relieved that she hadn't gone far and that she was probably okay. He quickly got dressed and drove to the hospital, understanding that it would still be hard to figure out what was going on. When he arrived, he immediately headed to the reception desk. My wife, Melanie. How is she? He asked, trying to stay calm. You can go in. She's in the doctor's office, the nurse said, pointing to a door. Josh entered the room and immediately saw Melanie sitting on the couch. She looked calm but a bit pale. Her eyes met his, and a faint smile appeared on her face. You look fine, Josh said, approaching her. I'm fine, really. It was just a checkup. Everything is okay, Melanie replied. At that moment, the door opened, and a middle-aged doctor entered with a small smile on his face. Good afternoon. Congratulations. Your wife is entering a new chapter in life, Josh, he said as he approached them. What do you mean? Josh asked, not understanding what was going on. The doctor looked at Melanie and smiled. Your wife is pregnant. We've done all the necessary tests, and the results are excellent. You're going to be a father soon. Josh stood silently, staring at the doctor. At first, he was overcome with joy. He tried to imagine it. A child would be coming into his life. It was incredible. He should have been happy, but at the same time, his heart was racing for another reason. The realization came to him slowly but clearly. Melanie's pregnancy might not be his. He looked at her face, at her blue eyes that no longer looked at him with the same carefree expression. He felt an overwhelming question creeping into his mind. Who is the father of this child? Melanie, is there a possibility this isn't my child? Josh asked, trying not to let his emotions show. Melanie held his gaze, but the confident expression she often wore was gone. This is your child, Josh. I couldn't do that to you. I love you. Love? Do you really expect me to believe that after everything that's happened? His voice broke with anger. I know, Melanie. I know you've been cheating on me. How can I be sure this child is mine? Melanie held her breath for a few seconds, her eyes clouding with emotion. She raised her hand and barely touched his. Josh, I don't know what else to say. I made a mistake, I admit it. But this is your baby. All I need now is your trust. Josh felt his heart clench in pain. He knew that cheating and then trying to fix everything wasn't the best solution. But at the same time, he couldn't understand how to trust her again with something as important as his child. I can't live like this, Melanie, he said, tears streaming down his face. This isn't the first time you've lied to me. I don't know if I can handle another betrayal. Josh, please. She grabbed his hand, trying to hold on to him. I'll do everything to earn your trust. I'll do everything for you and our child. 10 weeks into her pregnancy, Josh asked Melanie to take a test to confirm if the child was his. He knew she had cheated on him, but if the child was his, he was willing to stay with her. Josh sat, holding a small plastic stick from the test Melanie had just taken. She stood nearby, trying to look calm, but Josh could see her nervous hand constantly touching the edge of the table. He couldn't believe what was happening. He had been waiting for this confirmation, hoping it would all be a misunderstanding, but the test left no room for doubt. "It can't be," he whispered, trying to imagine a different reality, but the result was undeniable. Melanie remained silent. Her eyes carried concealed pain but also guilt, which he could no longer accept. She knew this moment was inevitable, and everything had led to this point where the truth could no longer be hidden. "This is not my child," Josh said, forcing the words out of himself as if they were a heavy stone in his chest. His voice broke, and the pain left him breathless. He looked at Melanie but no longer saw the woman he once loved. All those months of lies and deceit, now it was a reality he could no longer ignore. Melanie braced herself, her lips cracked under the weight of unspeakable pain. She couldn't deny it, even though her soul was torn apart by the catastrophe she had caused. "Josh, I made a mistake. I didn't want this. I was out of my mind." Her voice was weak, broken, but she still tried to explain. "Out of your mind?" he asked, trying not to cry. His voice sounded almost mocking. "You've destroyed me, Melanie. You cheated on me, and now you're trying to convince me that everything will be okay? What am I supposed to say to you?" He looked up, but there was no choice left for Melanie. The test was conclusive, and everything that had happened before only confirmed her betrayal. "I can't live with this lie anymore," Josh said, feeling his entire world turn upside down. "You didn't just betray me. You're now pretending that everything will be fine, that I should stay. But this isn't my child. I can't. I can never trust you again." Melanie was on the verge of breaking. Her hands trembled, and her heart pounded so hard it seemed she would collapse any moment. She left the room and returned a few minutes later, holding some documents. "I'm filing for divorce," Josh said, and it was the end of their relationship. Each word was like a blow echoing in his chest. Now he couldn't even imagine what life would be like after this. Melanie looked at him, her eyes full of tears, but she knew there was nothing she could do to change things. It was his choice. He no longer loved her as he once did. "Would you stay with your wife if you found out she was pregnant, but not by you?"